Welcome to week 3. This week we're going to be talking about different structures and functions of the flowering plant parts. For example, roots, stems, and leaves. So I'm choosing here to specifically talk about flowering plants or angiosperms. So I'm going to be covering roots first, and then in another video you're going to see stems and leaves combined. So just bear with me. So I chose to do roots first because roots are quite interesting. First is that we don't get to see them very often, but I think they're quite interesting. So just to put things into perspective, lots of people use roots as a really important source of food. So if you think about manioc, for example, or cassava, that's a plant that is native to the Amazon area, but it's now all over the place. It's one of the most important food crops in the whole planet. People in Africa eat it, people in the Philippines eat it. It's very common in Asia now and in a lot of areas in the Pacific, such as Fiji. So cassava is a major root. It's quite big. It can grow and get to this size in about 6 months. So here you can see people cleaning it, and this is what people normally do. They would dry it and make it into a flour, and then you can store it and use it for a very long time. So you can find it here in Hawaii too, so it's an important food crop. Here's another picture so you can see how big these roots get, and this is a picture from Africa. Okay, so another important root crop is sweet potato or wala. The scientific name here is Ipomoea batatas. So sweet potato is also native to Latin America. Polynesians went native to Latin America, probably the coast of Ecuador, and we know this because of linguistics. So the word wala can be traced back all the way to indigenous languages in Ecuador. So this plant also, it's all over the planet. People grow it everywhere, and the Polynesian varieties there are still present in Hawaii can be quite interesting, but there are also varieties from all over the planet. So here you can see all the different colors in sweet potato, and you know the varieties can taste quite different, but the cool thing about sweet potato is that it's very nutritious. So it kind of releases all the carbohydrates slowly into your bloodstream. Very different from eating white bread or white rice, for example. So it's a really good source of nutrients for people. And so that's an important food crop that is also a root. Okay, so here are the leaves and the flower. And I want to go back to monocots and dicots because it can put things in a little bit into perspective here. So if you were to cut the main root of monocots or dicots, you were to slice them horizontally and put them under the microscope, this is what you would see. In monocots, the vascular system would be kind of in a ring. And in dicots or eudicots, however you want to say it, it would be in this cross form. So you can only really see this under the microscope, but I'll show you in class when we have our lab. So here's the first time ever I'm talking about xylem and phloem. We will talk about this in more detail later on, but just to simplify things, I'll give you the definitions right now. So xylem is the part of the vascular system that is responsible for taking water from the roots all the way to the leaves of the plant. And phloem is the part of the vascular system that actually takes different sugars that the plant produces during photosynthesis, and then it can take that down from the leaves all the way down to where the plant stores that food. And in that case, it can be the root system. It can take all those carbohydrates from the leaves all the way to the roots if the plant is using the root as a storage. Okay, so we'll talk about all these different things later on, how to differentiate between monocots and dicots, but this is definitely one of the first steps that we can take to look at. You can also look at the outside of the roots and tell if it's a monocot or dicot, and I'll explain that in a little bit. Okay, so what do roots actually provide to the plant? First, they provide anchorage, and that's pretty straightforward. Without roots, the plants would just fall over. But they also produce storage. So I just talked about manioc roots and sweet potato roots. So the plant is storing all kinds of carbohydrates into the root system, and we take advantage of that and we eat the roots. But the plant is actually being extremely smart in a sense, because if you store everything into your root and then strong winds come or there's a drought, you have things in your root system that can help you through a tough time. Okay, another thing is absorption, and roots absorb water from the soil and they take that water up to the plant leaves, and the plant needs that water in order to photosynthesize. Without water, the plant cannot produce any sugars, any carbohydrates. So with absorption comes conduction. So the roots absorb water and they conduct that water through the vascular system, through the xylem, all the way up to the leaves. So how do roots develop? When a seed germinates, the embryo's radicle grows out and develops into the first root. So here you can see a seed germinating, and this is the radicle. So you can see the first root right here, and these are all root hairs. So it may develop into a very thick taproot, like this plant right here. So this is one long taproot with some branch roots. And that's the characteristics of dicots. So dicots have taproots. Monocots, on the other hand, have adventitious roots or fibrous roots. So you can see here in this grass that the roots are quite fibrous. So here you can see again a monocot versus a dicot. So fibrous root system, and this one is a taproot. Okay, so let's talk about root structure. How the roots look like under a microscope. So if you were to go and take the very, very tip of a root and you would make a slide and you put it under the microscope, this is what you would see. The first structure is the root cap, and it's right here, and it's made of a bunch of dead cells. And the reason for that is that it protects the tissue from damage. The roots are pushing down into the soil, so all those cells are there to protect the very, very tip of the root. And this is a really special place right here. So that root cap functions in gravity perception. So the root can actually tell which way to grow, and it grows down because it senses gravity. So on this very tip right here is the region of cell division, and it's composed of an apical meristem. So what an apical meristem is a region where cells are actually dividing, and they're just producing tons of new cells. So here it is, apical meristem, region of cell division. So this is how the root grows, is by producing new cells. I actually want to go back to here because there's the region of elongation. So those new cells are being produced, but then they're now elongating. And you can see from here the difference of the cells from here to here. The ones from here are much longer. But here in this area of the root, it's the region of maturation. So these cells are maturing and they're becoming specialized cells. So here in red and here in purple, you can see xylem and phloem. So one is taking water and the other one is delivering carbohydrates. Okay, so if you were to cut those roots horizontally and put it under the microscope like we covered before in a couple previous slides, you would see that in your dicots or dicots right here, your vascular system, your vascular bundle will be in the very center and it will be this X. So this is a really good clue that this is a dicot. On the other hand, if you see that there's a circle and then your bundles are kind of formed in this perfect little circle in the middle, this is a monocot. All right, so this region here outside the circle, it's called the cortex. And what the cortex does is a region where the plant can actually store some of those nutrients, some of those carbohydrates. So it's a really important region because these cells can store all kinds of stuff. On the outside layer is the epidermis. And the epidermis, kind of like our skin, is just protecting the root from the environment. This region right here, you can see xylem here and phloem right here. So I think we covered pretty much everything for roots, but I want to show you that this radicle that emerged from this little seed has all these little hairs right here. So if we were to take a little piece right here of this root and put under the microscope, you would see that there's this epidermal cell, again a skin cell, right? So this cell is really important because it kind of protects the root from the outside the environment. But if you look here, this is a root hair. So a root hair is just composed of one cell that kind of elongated out. So this hair is kind of protruding through the soil. Oops. It's protruding through the soil and it's able to absorb water. So water rushes in and it comes through the cells and until it reaches a region where it can be uptaken by the xylem. Here's a developing root hair. And here's the cortex, or the region where plants are storing some of those nutrients. Okay, so region of maturation. I just want to talk about how roots actually emerge from this. So there's a vascular cylinder right here that lies in the inside of the endodermis. And lateral roots actually emerge from this vascular cylinder. And the reason for this is that this is able, kind of like a root meristem, it's able to produce new cells. So this is what it's doing, it's producing new cells, so there's a lateral root forming right here. If that taproot gets damaged, the plant is able to produce new roots, and this is how it does it. So again, the pericycle with the endodermis is kind of laying directly against the inner boundary right here of the endodermis. So there you go, your lateral roots. So specialized roots, we talked about sweet potato already, but this is a Cucurbitaceae plant in the Cucurbitaceae family or melon family, and it's really good at storing water. So here's the plant, it's quite small, but look at the size of this root. And this plant lives near the ocean, so in really sandy soils. So this is a way that plants can actually, they do it in all different ways, but this is one way that plants evolve to survive these conditions. Right behind this woman here is a plant with silvery leaves. And I don't know if you remember from week 1, that we talked about silvery leaves being one of the adaptations to live near the ocean because it can kind of reflect back UV light. So this is just a separate adaptation to store water. All right, so food storage, sweet potatoes, water storage, a plant in the Cucurbitaceae family or the pumpkin family or melon family. And then there are propagative roots, and fruit trees are very good at that. So, for example, ulu or breadfruit what it'll do is it'll send out root suckers, and if you cut those suckers out, you can actually propagate plants using that method, so it's quite handy. So some fruit trees do that. So lots of modified roots, so carrots, turnips, sugar beets, those are all modified roots. And they're modified to store carbohydrates into that root system. There are also specialized roots like these pneumatophores. They are common in black mangrove, and these plants live in the tidal line right here, in tidal region. So when you're able to breathe, they kind of send out all these little black things, sometimes hundreds of feet up in where the sand is drier, and it's able to then exchange oxygen because roots have to breathe. They're alive, they need to breathe, so there's an exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide right here. So those are just specialized ways that plants can deal with these different conditions. So aerial roots are very common in orchids, and they are able to absorb through these specialized hairs water and nutrients from the atmosphere. Other types of specialized roots are these banyan trees right here. They're tropical trees, love to do this, and they're able to stabilize themselves in areas where the soil is very hard and there is a clay pan where the roots cannot penetrate really deep. So instead they make these roots. They're called buttress roots. Parasitic roots, there's a native plant here in Hawaii that does this a lot. It's called the dodder. And what it does is it doesn't photosynthesize, so it cannot produce its own food. So what it does is that it wraps itself in another plant and it kind of taps into the stem and steals nutrients and water and minerals from the phloem or the vascular system. All right, so how about roots and fungi? Some people think that, if a fungus is growing on a root, then the plant is diseased, but it's not the case at all. Lots of plants have relationships with fungi, and it's quite interesting how it works. So this is called mycorrhizae, and it's a form of mutualistic association with plant roots. It's quite interesting because the fungus is able to concentrate phosphorus much better than the plant can. So what the fungus does is that it covers the root system, and then it can then absorb and concentrate that phosphorus and feeds it directly into the plant. So if you see here, the hyphae of the fungus is growing inside the plant root. So it's kind of like they cut that little piece of a root horizontally and then put it under the microscope, and this is what you would see the hyphae. They're kind of like the fungus, like arms and legs. They kind of go inside the root system of the plant, and they exchange phosphorus and other nutrients directly into the root system. So we can see here xylem and phloem, or the vascular system right here in the middle. And what the plant does is that it can then give that fungus some carbon or some other things that the fungus needs. So a lot of plants do this. Some scientists think that maybe 80% of plants actually have relationships with fungi. So it's quite interesting, and it's also a new field of study. Okay, so this is a close-up photo. And then how about bacteria on the roots? Well, bacteria is kind of cool too, because I'll give you an example of the Fabaceae or legume family. So here the bacteria forms nodules right on the roots, and they just hang out there. So the plant kind of houses the bacteria. And then the nodules contain large numbers of nitrogen-fixing bacteria. So the bacteria specialize in fixing nitrogen to a form where plants can actually absorb it. So it converts nitrogen into nitrates, and then the plants can just pick it up. So it's great. And the plant can then offer carbon back into to the bacteria. So it's a two-way street. Okay, so I am done covering roots. Make sure that you read your lecture notes. There's a little section on roots. You should know what the function is, what the internal structures are, the systems, if it's fibers, if it's a taproot, and then how roots are formed. So take a look at those notes, and then in the next presentation I'm going to cover stems and leaves.